Imagine for a second a young hockey player. He's fiercely competitive, deeply dedicated, and just super motivated. He's putting in literally countless hours trying to be the absolute best, and yet he never makes it past being a limited ice time university-level player, right? It's tough. But this is actually a true story from leadership trainer Mark Schinkel. He noticed that a lot of the guys he played with were just dripping with raw talent, but they completely lacked discipline. And then, on the flip side, people like him had all the motivation in the world, but that simply wasn't enough to reach the pros. It really raises a fascinating question, doesn't it? I mean, if raw talent and sheer motivation aren't enough for sustainable success, what actually is? Why do highly motivated people still end up failing when they step into leadership roles?
Listen to this quote. In my early 40s, I had reached the top of my first mountain. That mountaintop turned out to be desolate. The idea of success I had been chasing turned out to be hollow. That is a seriously powerful realization from former Best Buy CEO Hubert Joly. You see, he climbed the corporate ladder, attained the power, and achieved what pretty much everyone would consider the pinnacle of success. But it felt totally empty. He realized that the whole outdated command and control definition of success, where you basically look at others as obstacles to overcome rather than partners, is just fundamentally flawed.
So, hello and welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are breaking down a massive shift that's happening right now in the business world. We're moving away from that old, rigid boss mindset and stepping into a much more modern, authentic approach to leadership. It's what we call the inside-out leadership revolution.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Here's our mental map for today's journey. We'll kick things off with Part 1, Beyond Command and Control. Then, Part 2, Discovering Your True North. Part 3, Avoiding Leadership Derailment. Part 4, Mindsets, Tasks, and Skills. And finally, Part 5, the I-to-E Transformation. Basically, we're going to map out the journey from deep internal self-discovery all the way out to external team coaching.
All right, let's start with Section 1, Beyond Command and Control, the end of the old boss.
So, for about 20 years, the prevailing model in the corporate world was shareholder primacy. It was this rigid command and control structure that was literally single-mindedly focused on maximizing share prices and, honestly, inflating the CEO's financial compensation. But researchers and business experts have finally realized this is a totally broken model. And why is that? Because it prioritized style, power, and charisma way over character. It completely missed the foundational elements of trust and transparency. To fix this, we have to flip how we think about leadership development on its head. Now, the outside-in approach takes its starting point from external factors, like what the customer or the market needs. And sure, that has its benefits, like improving the ease of doing business. But true, authentic leadership development, that is an inside-out process. It relies heavily on internal thinking, intuition, and self-awareness before it ever moves outward to impact others. Because let's face it, the hardest person you'll ever have to lead is yourself.
Which brings us to Section 2, Discovering Your True North, Processing Your Crucibles. So, Harvard Business School executive fellow Bill George explains that to find your deeply rooted passion, you actually have to examine your own life story. You have to process the most difficult episodes of your life, which he calls your crucibles. Basically, you can't lead others effectively if you don't really understand who you are at your absolute core. Take Howard Schultz, the founder of Starbucks, for example. He came from a very difficult background and had a deeply troubled relationship with his father. But instead of just running from that crucible, he processed it. He said, "The reservoir of all my life experiences shaped me as a person and as a leader." That difficult relationship actually fueled his intrinsic mission. He wanted to build a connection-focused company that his dad would have been proud to work in. He literally turned a painful past into his guiding purpose.
And this brilliantly illustrates what happens when you actually know your values. You gain immense moral courage. Just look at Mary Barra. When she became CEO of General Motors, she was immediately confronted with a tragic ignition switch crisis. Instead of hiding behind PR, she recalled 30 million vehicles. She used the crisis to create a burning platform to radically accelerate safety standards at GM. That right there is what living your true north looks like in action, putting your core values way above any short-term financial consequences.
But what happens when you don't do this internal work? Well, that brings us to Section 3, Avoiding Leadership Derailment, the danger of skipping self-discovery. Let's be real. A lot of people are impatient. They avoid examining their crucibles because, it's psychologically uncomfortable. Instead, they just chase the external trappings of success. The titles, the money, the corner office, and it almost always leads straight to career derailment. Bill George actually identifies 5 specific archetypes of flawed leaders who fall into this trap. First up, imposters, who gain power through politics but completely lack the self-insight to use it properly. Second, rationalizers. These are masters of denial, who constantly blame others for their own failures. Third, glory seekers, who obsess over external acclaim but feel completely spiritually hollow inside. Fourth, loners, who avoid close relationships and reject honest feedback. And fifth, shooting stars, who are just entirely obsessed with rapid advancement but make highly impulsive, self-serving decisions when they face any kind of setback. I actually want you to pause for a second and really look at this list. Be honest with yourself. Which of these traps do you think you might be most susceptible to falling into? It's a tough question for sure, but an absolutely necessary one.
All right, so once we've done that hard internal work, we have to actually move to action. Section 4, mindsets, tasks, and skills, translating the internal to external.
Because look, great internal intentions and a wonderful sense of purpose are frankly completely useless if they don't translate into daily execution. You have to actually do the things great leaders do. So how do we make that happen? The Achieve framework gives us 3 interlocking elements here. Step 1 is mindset. This flows directly from your core values and beliefs. It's basically your operating filter for decision-making. That mindset then directly determines step 2, your tasks. These are your daily activities, like what meetings do you prioritize? What conversations do you actually choose to engage in? And finally, step 3 is skills. This is pure execution. For instance, you might know you need to have a difficult conversation with an employee. That's the task. But your skills dictate how successfully you actually guide that conversation to a productive outcome.
Now, what's really interesting about this next point is how executive coach Lolly Doskal turns these abstract skills into highly practical daily habits. She points out that the #1 reason people leave their jobs is simply because they don't feel recognized for their hard work. So what do great leaders do? They recognize worth. They make themselves visible and available rather than, hiding out behind closed doors all day. They practice what they preach, setting a truly authentic example. They stay positive when things go negative, and they actively encourage others to voice their opinions so they can leverage the whole team's knowledge. Through consistency, these behaviors stop being tasks and just become second nature.
Which brings us to our final transition, Section 5, the I to We transformation, becoming a team coach.
For most of our lives, in school and college, in our early careers, we are heavily measured by our individual contributions. But the ultimate test for an emerging leader is flipping that switch. You have to stop being an individual contributor who just gets things done on your own and become a coach who empowers others to get things done. This is a concept heavily researched by Bill George and his co-author Zach Clayton. And through their extensive studies, they've definitively proven that modern leadership absolutely has to evolve. The old model of a boss just issuing orders, demanding compliance, and micromanaging subordinates, it just doesn't work anymore. Today's workforce wants to work collaboratively. So leaders must evolve from dictators into organizers and aligners.
Let's move on and see how this builds, because when you make this transition, it builds a completely different culture. Look at the I leader. They're focused purely on attaining power, while the we leader is focused on serving others. The I leader operates on the mindset of, I can do it on my own, while the we leader fundamentally knows it takes a team with complementary strengths. And notice the profound shift here. Instead of just directing others and taking all the credit, the authentic leader coaches others and gives the credit to the team. It is a massive fundamental shift from self-interest to shared purpose.
So as we wrap up today's explainer, I really want to leave you with a direct challenge. We've seen that raw motivation alone isn't enough. We've seen that chasing external validation just leads to a desolate mountaintop. True, sustainable leadership has to start from the inside out. It requires you to face your crucibles, deeply understand your rooted values, and then translate those values into daily habits that actually empower the people around you. So take a moment today. Step back from the noise of the daily grind and ask yourself, what is your true north?